Hello everyone, welcome back. I was currently working on my new YouTube channel for podcasts that I'm going to share with you very soon, by God's grace. I am working on the videos of all the episodes that are already published in Spotify and other platforms. I was also busy with some other mandated tasks for which I am late this time again. Sorry about that. Anyways, I'm here today to add another episode to our show called The Stories I Like to Read. So get ready to hear another masterpiece of our Rabindranath Tagore. Before I disclose the name of today's story, let me share my feelings with you about the last read. The Bengali title that was originally written by Tagore of that story, The Child's Return, is Khoka Babur Protyabartan. The title sounds so beautiful that I could not help sharing it with all my non-Bengali listeners. I hope you liked the sound of those words. Anyways, about the story, it was a bit too heavy a feeling for me. I do not feel myself of the stature to really comment or compliment on it, but all I can say is, did you notice how futile and elusive is the concept of someone own in this world? Only the greats like him can see this and face this to this level. I'm sorry I can't weave any more words about that story. Today I am going to read The Homecoming. I googled about the story, then I left it as it is and thought, let's see what it is ourselves and not through Google this time. So here we go. The Homecoming. Photik Chakraborty was the ringleader among the boys of the village. One day a plan for new mischief entered his head. There was a heavy log lying on the mud flat of the river, waiting to be shaped into a mast for a boat. His plan was that they should all work together to shift the log by main force from its place and roll it away. The owner of the log would be angry and surprised, while they would all enjoy the fun. Everyone supported the proposal and it was carried unanimously. But just as the fun was about to begin, Makhan, Photik's young brother, sauntered up without a word and sat down on the log in front of them all. The boys were puzzled for a moment. One of them pushed him rather timidly and told him to get up. But he remained quite unconcerned. He appeared like a young philosopher meditating on the futility of games. Photik was furious. Makhan, he cried, if you don't get up this minute, I'll thrash you. Makhan only moved to a more comfortable position. Now, if Photik was to keep his real dignity before the public, it was clear that he must carry out his threat. But his courage failed him at the crisis. His fertile brain, however, rapidly seized upon a new maneuver which would discomfort his brother and afford his followers added amusement. He gave the word of command to roll the log and Makhan over together. Makhan heard the word order and made it a point to honor to stick on. But like those who attempt earthly fame in other matters, he overlooked the fact that there was peril in it. The boys began to heave at the log with all their might, calling out, 1, 2, 3, go! and the word go, the log went. And with it went Makhan's philosophy, glory, and all. The other boys shouted themselves hoarse with delight, but Fatik was a little frightened. He knew what was coming, and he was not mistaken, for Makhan rose from Mother Earth, blind as fate, and screaming like the Furies. He rushed at Fatik, scratched his face, bit him and kicked him, and then went crying home. The first act of the drama was over. Fatik wiped his face and, sitting down on the edge of a sunken birch by the river bank, began to nibble a piece of grass. A boat came up to the landing, and a middle-aged man with grey hair and dark moustache stepped on shore. He saw the boy sitting there, doing nothing, and asked him where the Chakravartis lived. Fatik went on nibbling the grass and said, "Over there." But it was quite impossible to tell where he pointed. The stranger asked him again. He swung his legs to and fro on the side of the birch and said, "Go and find out," and continued to nibble the grass. But at that moment, a servant came down from the house and told Fatik that his mother wanted him. Fatik refused to move. But on this occasion, the servant was the master. He roughly took Fatik up and carried him, kicking and struggling in impotent rage. When Fatik entered the house, his mother saw him and called out angrily, "So you have been hitting Makhan again?" Fatik answered indignantly, "No, I haven't. Who told you that I had?" His mother shouted, "Don't tell lies. You have." Fatik said sullenly, "I tell you, I haven't. You ask Makhan." But Makhan thought it best to stick to his previous statement. He said, "Yes, mother, Fatik did hit me." Fatik's patience was already exhausted. He could not bear this injustice. He rushed at Makhan and rained on him a shower of blows. "Take that," he cried, and that, for telling lies. His mother took Makhan's side in a moment and pulled Fatik away, returning his blows with equal vigor. When Fatik pushed her aside, she shouted out, "What, you little villain? Would you hit your own mother?" It was just at this critical moment that the grey-haired stranger arrived. He asked what had occurred. Fatik looked sheepish and ashamed. But when his mother stepped back and looked at the stranger, her anger was changed into surprise, for she recognized her brother and cried, "Why, Dada? Where have you come from?" As she said these words, she bowed to the ground and touched his feet. Her brother Bishambar had gone away soon after she had married and had started business in Bombay. She herself had lost her husband while he was there. Bishambar had now come back to Calcutta and had at once made inquiries concerning his sister. As soon as he found out where she was, he had hastened to see her. The next few days were full of rejoicing. The brother asked how the two boys were being brought up. He was told by his sister that Fatik was a perpetual nuisance. He was lazy, disobedient and wild, but Makhan was as good as gold, as quiet as a lamb, and very fond of reading. Bishambar kindly offered to take Fatik off his sister's hands and educate him with his own children in Calcutta. The widowed mother readily agreed. When his uncle asked Fatik if he would like to go to Calcutta with him, his joy knew no bounds, and he said, "Oh yes, yes, uncle," in a way that made it quite clear that he meant it. It was an immense relief to the mother to get rid of Fatik. She had a prejudice against the boy and no love was lost between the two brothers. She was in daily fear that he would someday either drown Makhan in the river or break his head in a fight or urge him on into some danger. At the same time, she was a little distressed to see Fatik's extreme eagerness to leave his home. Fatik, as soon as all was settled, kept asking his uncle every minute when they were to start. He was on pins all day long with excitement and lay awake most of the night. He bequeathed to Makhan in perpetuity his fishing rod, his big knife, and his marbles. Indeed, at this time of departure, his generosity towards Makhan was unbounded. When they reached Calcutta, Fatik met his aunt for the first time. She was by no means pleased with this unnecessary addition to her family. She found her own 3 boys quite enough to manage without taking anyone else, and to bring a village lad of 14 into their midst was terribly upsetting. Bishambar should really have thought twice before committing such an indiscretion. In this world, there is no worse nuisance than a boy at the age of 14. He is neither ornamental nor useful. It is impossible to shower affection on him as on a smaller boy, and he is always getting in the way. If he talks with a childish lisp, he is called a baby, and if in a grown-up way, he is called impertinent. In fact, talk of any kind from him is resented. Then he is at the unattractive growing age. He grows out of his clothes with indecent haste. His voice grows hoarse and breaks the quavers. His face grows suddenly angular and unsightly. It is easy to excuse the shortcomings of early childhood, but it is hard to tolerate even unavoidable lapses in a boy of 14. He becomes painfully self-conscious, and when he talks with elderly people, he is either unduly forward or else so unduly shy that he appears ashamed of his own existence. Yes, it is at this age that in his heart of hearts, a young lad most craves recognition and love, and he becomes the devoted slave of anyone who shows him consideration. But none dare openly love him, for that would be regarded as undue indulgence and therefore bad for the boy. So, what with scolding and chiding, he becomes very much like a stray dog that has lost its master. His own home is the only paradise that a boy of 14 can know. To live in a strange house with strange people is little short of torture, while it is the height of bliss to receive the kind looks of women and never to suffer their slights. It was anguish to Fatik to be an unwelcome guest in his aunt's house, constantly despised and slighted by this elderly woman. If she ever asked him to do anything for her, he would be so overjoyed that his joy would seem exaggerated, and then she would tell him not to be so stupid, but to get on with his lessons. This constant neglect gave Fatik a feeling of almost physical oppression. He wanted to go out into the open country and fill his lungs with fresh air. But there was no open country to go to. Surrounded on all sides by Calcutta houses and walls, he would dream night after night of his village home and longed to be back there. He remembered the glorious meadow where he used to fly his kite all day long, the broad river banks where he would wander a livelong day, singing and shouting for joy, the narrow brooks where he could dive and swim whenever he liked. He thought of the band of boy companions over whom he was despot, and above all, thoughts of even that tyrant mother of his, who had such a prejudice against him, filled his mind day and night. A kind of physical love like that of animals, a longing to be in the presence of the loved one, an inexpressible wistfulness during absence, a silent cry of the inmost heart for the mother, like the lowing of a calf in the twilight. This love, which was almost an animal instinct, stirred the heart of this shy, nervous, thin, uncouth and ugly boy. No one could understand it, but it preyed upon his mind continually. There was no more backward boy in the whole school than Fatik. He gaped and remained silent when the teacher asked him a question, and like an overladen ass patiently suffered the many thrashings that were meted out to him. When other boys were out at play, he stood wistfully by the window and gazed at the roofs of the distant houses, and if by chance he espied children playing on the open terrace of a roof, his heart would ache with longing. One day he summoned up all his courage and asked his uncle, "Uncle, when can I go home?" His uncle answered, "Wait till the holidays come." But the holidays would not come till October, and there was still a long time to wait. One day Fatik lost his lesson book. Even with the help of books, he had found it very difficult to prepare his lesson. But now it became impossible. Day after day the teacher caned him unmercifully. He became so abjectly miserable that even his cousins were ashamed to own him. They began to jeer and insult him more than even the other boys did. At last he went to his aunt and told her that he had lost his book. With an expression of the greatest contempt, she burst out, "You great clumsy country lot! How can I afford to buy you new books 5 times a month when I have my own family to look after?" That night, on his way back from school, Fatik had a bad headache and a shivering fit. He felt that he was going to have an attack of malaria. His one great fear was that he might be a nuisance to his aunt. The next morning, Fatik was nowhere to be seen. Search in the neighborhood proved futile. The rain had been pouring in torrents all night, and those who went out to look for the boy were drenched to the skin. At last, Bishambar asked the police to help him. At nightfall, a police van stopped at the door of the house. It was still raining and the streets were flooded. 2 constables carried Fatik out in their arms and placed him before Bishambar. He was wet through from head to foot, covered with mud, while his face and eyes were flushed with fever and his limbs were trembling. Bishambar carried him in his arms and took him inside the house. When his wife saw him, she exclaimed, "What a heap of trouble this boy has given us. Hadn't you better send him home?" Fatik heard her words and sobbed aloud. "Uncle, I was just going home, but they dragged me back again." The fever rapidly increased, and throughout the night the boy was delirious. Bishambar brought in a doctor. Fatik opened his eyes and looking up to the ceiling said vacantly, "Uncle, have the holidays come yet?" Bishambar wiped the tears from his eyes and took Fatik's thin burning hands in his own and sat by his side through the night. Again the boy began to mutter till at last his voice rose almost to a shriek. "Mother," he cried, "don't beat me like that, mother. I am telling the truth." The next day, Fatik for a short time became conscious. His eyes wandered round the room as if he expected someone to come. At last, with an air of disappointment, his head sank back on the pillow. With a deep sigh, he turned his face to the wall. Bishambar read his thoughts and, bending down his head, whispered, "Fatik, I have sent for your mother." The day dragged on. The doctor said in a troubled voice that the boy's condition was very critical. Fatik began to cry out, "By the mark, 3 fathoms. By the mark, 4 fathoms. By the mark." Many times had he heard the sailors on the river steamers calling out the mark on the lead line. Now he was himself plumbing an unfathomable sea. Later in the day, Fatik's mother burst into the room like a whirlwind and, rocking herself to and fro from side to side, began to moan and cry. Bishambar tried to calm her, but she flung herself on the bed and cried, "Fatik, my darling, my darling." Fatik stopped his restless movements for a moment. His hands ceased beating up and down. He said, "Ah." The mother cried again, "Fatik, my darling, my darling." Very slowly, Fatik's eyes wandered, but he could no longer see the people round his bed, and at last he murmured, "Mother, the holidays have come."